Okay, at this time, I'd like to reconvene the special board meeting. Clerk of the board will again call roll.
Hall,
Present.
Solis,
Present.
Pike,
Here.
Segura,
Here.
Tarantino,
Here.
Aguirre,
Here.
Thank you. Public employee evaluation appointment transfer, government code section 54957. Public employee discipline, dismissal, release, reclassification, reassignment, resignation, transfer, government code section 54957. The board took the following action. Motion by Hall, second by Solis, to approve the appointment of Dr. Eduardo Reyes as Chief Human Resource Officer with a vote of Hall yes, Pike yes, Segura yes, Solis yes, Tarantino yes. Second, moved by Hall, seconded by Segura, to ratify the termination notice of one certificated management employee with a vote of Hall yes, Pike yes, Segura yes, Solis yes, Tarantino no. The special board meeting is now adjourned. At this time, I'd like to call the special board workshop to order. Clerk of the board, please call the roll.
Hall,
Yes.
Solis,
Present.
Pike,
Yes.
Segura,
Here.
Tarantino,
Here.
Aguirre,
Here.
Great. We'll now hold a moment of silence and a pledge of allegiance. How about Ms. Hall? Are you okay with leading that?
Stand with me, please. Did you say a moment of silence?
Sure.
All right, thank you. Hand over your heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Hall. Per Government Code Section 54954.3, this is the point on the agenda where members of the public may address the board on any item that has been described in a notice for the special workshop before or during consideration of that item. Submitted speaker comments shall refrain from using profanity and shall be written in a respectful manner. Thank you for your cooperation.
There are no speakers, Mr. President.
There are no speakers. So then great, we'll just get right into the workshop on government board roles, fiduciary responsibility, and fraud prevention.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, members of the board. My name is Ruben Duran. I wasn't sure whether Ms. Carbuccio or someone else would be taking over first, but I'm happy to jump right in if that's okay with the board.
Yes, sir. Jump right in.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to see all of you this afternoon. I hope that you are well. I know that is busy and trying times at the district and throughout the state. And so I appreciate the opportunity to spend the next hour or so with you on these important issues. I believe you may know that I spent similar time with various members of your staff earlier today, and we had some good conversation, some good discussion. The information that I shared with them is very similar to that which I'm going to share with you. You have some special slides because you are special people as the elected representatives in your community. So with that brief introduction, let me start to share my screen. For those who may be wondering sort of what qualifies me to stand up here and offer this training, let me just offer a brief introduction, if I may, Mr. President, on my background. My name is Ruben Duran. I am a partner at the law firm of Best and Krieger, which is a statewide law firm with about 240 lawyers servicing all manner of public entities in California, including school districts, including community college districts. I maintain a very busy practice working for cities and special districts and school districts. I am the general counsel for Yucaipa Cali Mesa Joint Unified School District, in the Inland Empire. I currently also serve as City Attorney of the City of Fontana and City Attorney of the City of Ontario, where I reside with my wife of 26 years, Cynthia. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I do training similar to this throughout the year at various points for many different organizations, and it's always a pleasure for me to do so. These issues are important and timely and topical, and they're very specific for us today. With respect to your particular duties as members of the board in your fiduciary capacity, we're going to talk about what it means to be a fiduciary and how you have a responsibility, as you always do, to serve your district, but in a special way of responsibility of protection when it comes to financial and other matters. And so we're going to talk about your duties and the public trust. Let me see if are you seeing the slide that says bad education?
We just see the title page, board members fiduciary responsibility.
There we go. I'm clicking a new slide now. How about that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, so in this time of lockdown and staying home, there have been quite a few movies and television shows that my wife and I have binged on and had the opportunity to watch. I don't know whether any of the board or any of your staff have watched this movie that came out in April. It stars Hugh Jackman as Superintendent Frank Tassone and Allison Janney as Assistant Superintendent. Oh my goodness, I'm blanking on her name because she takes two different last names in the movie. It's based on a true story of a series of events that happened in the early 2000s at a school district on Long Island in New York State. It's a true story that happens to make a very entertaining movie with some very real lessons, I think, for those of us who work in the public sphere, and some things to remember. I will be referring to various scenes in the movie and the story in and out during my presentation. It's not necessary that you have seen the movie, I hope, to understand what I'm talking about. But certainly, if you have seen the movie, you may remember some of these scenes and some of these lessons. So let's start with what is the role of a board member just generically? And this, I'm sure, as experienced board members, all of you are familiar with, but I think it bears repeating for the public who is watching today, and certainly as a reminder to all of us, including your staff, as to what very specific and special role you play. So you, as elected representatives, provide the citizen oversight of the local government that is the school district. And that system of local oversight and representative government, of course, is the cornerstone of democracy in our country. You're locally elected and entrusted with governing your public schools, and you fulfill 5 major responsibilities. I'm sure there are many other things that you do, but generically, along with other school districts in the state, you set the direction by policy, by developing policies for your district, for your staff. You establish an effective and efficient structure by which your employees provide the very essential and necessary service of a quality public education to the citizens and residents that you represent. You provide support and leadership for your staff in achieving those objectives that are set out by you in your policymaking role. You ensure accountability from the superintendent on down to including consultants like me to ensure that we are all fulfilling our obligations in an effective and an efficient way and in an ethical way. And you provide community leadership to advocate for those you serve. And of course, school boards are unique and special in California because the public they serve, it spans, of course, the students that are in our schools, whether they're children or adults or people with special needs, but it's also by extension their parents, their families, their support structures, and ultimately the community as a whole, because as you know, an educated workforce is necessary to ensure that a community grows and it thrives and it continues to provide what its citizens need to be successful and happy and productive in their lives. So your role is to act collectively with your fellow trustees as stewards and district officers and makers of policy so that the district can carry out its mission effectively. Of course, the mission is yours. You yourselves or some variation of your board adopted this statement that we included in this presentation. You know that you're located in the heart of an international border community, truly unique in the country when it comes to that aspect of your community. The Sweetwater Union High School District ensures a safe, inclusive, collaborative culture that empowers each student to actively engage in a meaningful educational experience to pursue their personal and academic success. Certainly, you put it much better than I did in when I was talking before in the mission of your district. And so your role and your duty as a director is to provide that leadership, that oversight, as we talked about already, and to ensure that the district itself as a whole, as a collective team of professionals, is responsive to the values, beliefs, and priorities of your community. This again is the governance standards that are reflected in your website. Again, I think that these are statements that you have all seen and blessed, and I would hope that you take to heart. Essentially, it's in your responsibility to act in the best interest of every student in the district, and that also comes with having major commitments to the various stakeholders in that community, the parents and guardians of those students, all the members of the community, your employees, the state itself, and overseeing the education system, and laws pertaining to public education and the establishment of policies in the district. So let's get to the meat of the matter here in terms of what we're talking about today, and that is your role as fiduciaries. We're going to talk about what is a fiduciary duty, to whom it applies, and to whom it's owned. What are the duties that are owed in that relationship? We'll talk about the general fiduciary rule, the fiduciary standards, and your own code of ethics. I'm a lawyer, so I get to obsess about things that are Latin terms. Although I wish I could speak the language or read it. I actually have a son who's quite talented with his Latin. So he's taught me that fiduciary comes from the words fides or fiducia, each of which means trust and confidence. And really that trust and that confidence is reflected in your special place as an elected representative. The public puts their trust and their confidence in you and other public officials that you're going to act in their best interest when it comes to the decisions you make, when it comes to the oversight that you provide, and fiduciarily, in particular, when it comes to how we manage and oversee the money that flows through the district to serve your constituents. So a fiduciary relationship arises when someone is acting for another. Again, here you are acting for the community that represented you, for the students that you serve. And when the public chooses you as an elected official, when they go into the ballot box or when they mail in their absentee ballot and mark your name, they're putting their trust and their confidence that you're going to be acting in the public's best interest. The recurring theme here is trust, confidence, and duty. It'll make its way through much of our conversation today. And it starts with you as the elected representatives, and then it flows to the superintendent, to the cabinet, to the rest of the employees, again, all in service of our public. So to whom do we owe this fiduciary duty? Again, we owe it to the public, for whom we are making decisions about spending taxpayer money, taxpayer and other public money. Certainly using the power of the purse, wielding the power, as it says on this slide, and using your power to regulate the school system itself is a weighty responsibility, truly a sacred honor. And quite frankly, speaking personally for me as a lawyer, in working with yourselves and with other school boards with whom I work and elected officials, it's truly an honor to be a lawyer, to be a professional working for the public good. So the general standard of a fiduciary duty is that a public official must perform their duties in good faith, in a manner that they believe to be in the best interest of those they serve, and with such care including reasonable inquiry, as an ordinarily prudent person in a like position would use under similar circumstances. Okay, I'm gonna stop the slide and ask you to repeat that all to me at once. I'm just kidding, of course. There's a lot there to unpack, and I find it helpful to maybe to break it up into bite-sized chunks. So the first part there is the public official must perform their duties in good faith. Good faith is a phrase and a term that I'm sure many of us are familiar with in the everyday context of our lives, right? When we are children, even though we may not know that it's called good faith, we have a sense of whether someone's been fair with us. We have a sense of whether we're being treated honestly and with good faith. And that carries all the way through our lives as young people, as adults in business, as members of families, as members of organizations and clubs. When we interact with other human beings or other organizations, we want to feel comfortable. We want to sense that we're being dealt with in good faith, meaning honestly, meaning for the right reasons, in a manner that you believe to be in the best interest of those you serve. Okay, so the idea here is you act in good faith for someone else's best interest. Doesn't mean only for your own best interest, or only for your friend's best interest, or only for your most favorite business's best interest. Really, it's for the greater good of the community and the people that elected you. And so when you do that, you're doing it as a fiduciary. You've got to do it with care. And so what kind of care are we talking about? Well, we're talking about reasonable care that an ordinarily prudent person in your position would use under the circumstances. Those are all sort of very legalistic sounding phrases. And I can almost see your general counsel, Ms. Carbuccia, nodding her head, because these are the sorts of words that we use in our day-to-day practice in terms of, okay, look, what is the standard that we're held to, that our clients are held to? And it's not that you're going to be held to the highest standard of the most accomplished professional, the most educated expert, but you are going to be held to a reasonable standard of what an ordinary person, what an ordinary school board member in your position, with the resources that are available to you, knowing what you know, knowing your community, are you rising up to what the standard would be for any ordinary person in terms of making your decisions and the process by which you take in information and make your decisions. An important part of this duty of fiduciaries is to have or to engage in reasonable inquiry. And I was going to highlight that section. I'm sorry that I did not. But essentially this concept that, look, part of being a fiduciary means asking questions, right? It means not just letting things flow by you and taking everything at face value, but asking reasonable questions, the kind of questions an ordinarily prudent person would ask, an ordinarily prudent board member would ask, in a reasonable way. And we'll get into some examples of that a little bit later as we go through. So because we have the power as fiduciaries to act for others, we've got standards under the law that apply to us in ways that don't apply to just everyday ordinary people in the normal course. So the first is the duty of care, the second of loyalty, and third of honesty. Those are very specific duties in the fiduciary context, and courts and judges and regulatory agencies look to ensure that fiduciaries have met these particular duties. So let's talk about the first, a duty of care. We talked a little bit about what that means in terms of reasonable inquiry, but it means also here using, again, the resources that are available to you, including your own skills, your own diligence, and your own inquiry on behalf of those you serve. You must act with due care when making decisions on behalf of the students of the district and your community. And the law is going to hold that when you're meeting your duty of care, you're not going to be negligent in performing those duties. You're not going to, again, sort of fall down on the job. You're going to do what's reasonable. That includes educating yourself about the issues that your community faces. It means talking to your community, your staff, and other experts, reading reports and studies that come your way that are meant to inform you and educate you and help you in carrying out your duties. And ultimately, it means making decisions that reflect your best judgment given the information that you've been given, in terms of what will produce the best results for the community. The next duty is that of loyalty. And again, this is, these are concepts that we inherently know are important from the time that we're young. And if someone is loyal to us, whether it's a friend or a pet or a parent, or later on in our lives as a business or a business partner, we understand what that means to have, to accept and to provide loyalty. So fiduciaries are forbidden from acting in any way that is adverse or contrary to the interests of those served. It is common sense, but it's certainly good to see it and to read it and to hear it in the context of our service as public officials. It means not putting your own financial or political interests ahead of the public's. It means those things take a back seat to whatever would be the best decision for the public's interest. And it means that your loyalty must be to the entity you serve, that is to the district, and to the public that relies on you. And again, not your own interests, whether they're financial or otherwise. Along with the duty of loyalty, the law prohibits us from using our position to essentially extract personal gain and to use public resources for personal gain. This takes the form of taking advantage of personal advantages and perks for public officials up and down the spectrum across the state. We deal with issues of gifts, loans, the use or misuse of public funds, nepotism as a reality in the workplace, and political advantage. In other words, making decisions that might serve a political purpose more than the ultimate good purpose of your community that you're serving. I will pause here to recognize that you five in particular are political people in ways that the rest of us are not, and that's part and parcel of your service. It is something, quite frankly, that I admire, that I respect, because it takes quite a bit to put yourself on the line every 4 years and to ask for votes and support. And certainly you work in a political environment. And so I'm not suggesting here that you need to act like you're not a political person at all, or that politics aren't a reality of the world that you work in. What I am asking you, and what the law does ask you, is that when there are political considerations that are going to come in or might come into a decision that's placed before you, that you put those in their proper perspective and you put them behind what is in the best interest of the districts. Gifts, loans, misuse of funds, and nepotism. There are entire sections of the law, and there are entire trainings that deal with each of those issues. I'm going to touch on them only briefly as we make our way through the rest of the presentation. Finally, as a fiduciary, we've got duties of honesty, and we're held to a higher standard when it comes to being forthright with our colleagues, with the people we serve, with the agencies to whom we report. That's an essential part of being a fiduciary, and it means full disclosure of all the relevant facts to your knowledge. It means also, like I said earlier, asking questions so that you have all the information and all the facts, and using the resources available to you so that you can meet these highest standards of honesty and disclosure. When the public places powers in our hands, they rely on us to exercise that power prudently in an honest and a meaningful way. To that end, the legislature has blessed us with a whole structure and framework to help us be honest as an entity, as an organization. I'm talking here, of course, about the Brown Act, which is the state's open meeting law applicable to school districts and other local agencies, and the Public Records Act, which is the state law that essentially makes nearly every document that we work with, whether it's an actual piece of paper or an electronic file or a photograph or a spreadsheet, makes it open and accessible to the public, so that the public can engage in meaningful oversight of what we do as public officials, as an entity, so that they can be informed of how their money is being spent and what is the basis of the decisions that we're making and that you're making on their behalf. Of course, neither of these laws is absolute in terms of everything must be open all the time, or every record must be provided anytime it's asked for. There are, thankfully, written into the laws meaningful exceptions that are important in conducting the necessary business in the environment in which we work. So, for example, you just finished a closed session not more than 40 minutes ago, where the law recognizes you need to have conversations in a confidential setting, in a protected setting, so that you can get advice from your lawyers, so that you can have communications among yourself about personnel in a way that protects the public employees' privacy interests. Same thing on the Public Records Act. Not every document that we have is going to be subject to disclosure. Certain documents, of course, are going to reflect private, confidential information, whether it's personnel information for our employees, whether it's private information that's specific to particular students, whether it's health information that's protected by the HIPAA laws. We temper our duty of honesty with what's allowed in the law. I will pause here just to ask whether anybody on the board, Mr. President, has questions, or would you prefer that I take questions at the end?
Why don't we go with questions at the end?
Okay, great. Let's move on to how we apply these fiduciary duties in our day-to-day work here at the district. So, we expect our members of the board to work with each other and the superintendent to ensure that a high-quality education is provided to each student. Ultimately, that is our main goal, and how we go about achieving that goal certainly can be a multifaceted, complex set of circumstances, but always it should be guided by this fiduciary duty and aspect of the work that we do. We expect and ask and hope that we each act with dignity, understanding the implications of the demeanor and our behavior in a public setting like a board meeting or a community event, but sometimes even in private settings, right? Because people that we talk to, they may want to share a conversation they had with me as a special counsel to the district, or with one of you as a board member. I always have to remember that when I speak and I'm acting in my capacity as a consultant and special counsel to you, I reflect you. I reflect your leadership. I reflect what you stand for in the district. It's important that I keep confidential matters confidential, of course, and the same requirements apply to you, board members, as fiduciaries, and to your staff. Part of this also means that we ask you to participate in professional development and to put in the time and the energy necessary to be an informed and an effective leader. You're doing that here today, obviously, by listening to me on this video call. But I'm sure that there are countless opportunities for you to do so in your day-to-day lives down there in the district. And so I think this is just a reminder that when you're doing that, it is in a way living out your fiduciary responsibilities, applying those fiduciary duties to the work that you do. All the while, we hope you understand and remember that authority for the district to act rests with the board as a whole, and not necessarily with individual board members. The board as a whole could, of course, delegate authority to the president or to a board member or to the superintendent to do a certain thing, to take a certain action. But of course, that authority has to emanate from a decision of the board. And throughout all of this, I know and I'm confident that you operate and understand the importance of operating openly with trust and integrity as leaders in your community. I understand, though, that all of that, what I just talked about, is not necessarily always 100% easy. Whether it's because there are so many things happening at once, or whether it's a gray area that may or may not, you may or may not be sure falls under your fiduciary responsibilities. I want you to know that you're not alone. That you have at your disposal resources, primarily, and chief of which are your superintendent and his staff, your general counsel and her office, and it's our job to help you do your job and to make sure that you are meeting your responsibilities as a fiduciary in an ethical way. I think I can speak for Ms. Carbuccia and Dr. Aguirre when I say that all of them are honored to provide that service, because we understand that it's critical to ensuring that we do a good job, one, and two, that the public understands and accepts and trusts what we do. We are going to shift over to the specific issue of fraud now. This part of this training is, of course, fraud prevention. So we're going to talk a little bit about what fraud is and look at some different types of fraud. We're talking, of course, in the occupational context here. The district is an organization. It's a legal entity. It's a government agency, and so it will or it might face issues like these: asset misappropriation, corruption or manipulation of financial statements, cash skimming, falsifying expense reports, or forging company checks. So I have to say that that I am comfortable and confident that the extreme example that was given in the movie Bad Education is not happening at Sweetwater. And quite frankly, I hope it's not happening at any school district in California, because it was pretty extreme. But as we go through these next slides on fraud, I will describe a little bit of the plot line of that movie and the characters as illustrations of how to deal with the fraud topics that we're talking about right now. Fraud can come in many forms. I mentioned a couple on the previous slide, but here are some other names that are given to it: theft, embezzlement, collusion, securities fraud, and conflicts of interest, violations of conflicts of interest, quite frankly. And here is the legal definition of misappropriation. It includes a particular shout out to misappropriation in the public context, which I've highlighted there. It is the intentional illegal use of someone else's property or funds for one's own use or another unauthorized purpose, particularly by a public official or a trustee of a trust or an executor of a decedent's estate. And each of those individuals, whether it's a public official, the trustee of a trust, or the executor or administrator of an estate, owes a fiduciary duty to somebody else. And that's why the definition of misappropriation incorporates all of those instances. Embezzlement, of course, is a word that we will note when it comes across the screen on cable news or across a headline on the newspaper. It involves the taking of personal property, including money, by someone to whom it was entrusted. In other words, someone had access to someone else's money and they decided to keep a little bit of it for themselves. Collusion is a collaborative agreement that's usually kept secret amongst rivals to prevent open competition through a deceptive means in order to gain a market advantage. Not entirely applicable in the education context, but certainly the concepts of secret understandings and agreements, secret collaboration between and among parties could find its way into the education context. Specifically, when it comes to federal law and the issuance of securities such as bond funds, the 1933 Securities Act provides the key anti-fraud provisions that are used in enforcement against local entities, including school districts. And there can be a violation of this statute for knowing, that is, intentional or reckless or negligent conduct in connection with making an untrue statement of material fact or omitting a material fact in the offer and sale of securities, such as bonds. Again, tying it back to those responsibilities of honesty, for principally honesty, but also care and loyalty in the fiduciary context that we talked about earlier. When you're acting to issue bonds or to purchase or sell securities, this is the standard to which you're held under the federal law. So there can be a violation of these provisions, again, as I said, knowingly or recklessly or even negligently doing any of these things here in the slide. That is, employing any device, scheme, or artifice in order to defraud, to essentially to lie, to put forth a reality that is not there, or to not tell the whole truth about a reality that is there. To engage in any transaction, practice, or course of business which operates or would operate as a fraud or deceit upon the purchaser of the exchange. And then, of course, Section 15 imposes the liability on specific individuals for a violation of those other provisions of the Securities Act. So violations of conflict of interest involve corruption schemes where an employee uses their influence in the district or in district transactions to obtain a personal benefit that violates that employee's or that official's duty to the employer or the organization, and of course, by extension, our duty to the public that we serve. Couple of the characteristics for the type of fraud that certainly gets caught, gets prosecuted, gets public attention is that it happens at the higher levels within the organization, and the motive is usually some hidden interest of whoever the perpetuator is. And so this is where we're going to talk about Frank Tassone at the Long Island School District and his CBO. So they clearly are highly placed individuals in that district. And the movie goes through the process by which a student newspaper discovered that there were some irregularities in some of the books of the district. There was a big project that was being touted called the Skywalk, which I believe to have been just like a bridge from one part of one of the campuses over to another part so that students and teachers could walk from one place to another without being exposed to the elements or without crossing traffic or what have you. And so there's a young high school student who is writing a story about the Skywalk, and she goes into the district offices and talks to the superintendent just by chance. She knocked on the CBO's door, but she wasn't there. The superintendent calls her into his office, and she says, I'm whatever her name was, and I'm writing about the Skywalk. And he says, okay, well, what do you want to know? And she says, well, I just like a quote about it. It's just really a puff piece. Like she herself was, not really hot on the scent of anything. She just wanted to get her story written as it was assigned. And the superintendent tells her, it's only a puff piece if you make it a puff piece. Go out there and research it and put your heart into it. So she took him at his word, and she ended up doing quite a bit of research into documents that the district had about the Skywalk, and ultimately it led her to many other documents where she was able to, at the high school level, to put pieces together of a picture that showed serious irregularities in the district's finances, large amounts of money that were spent on companies for products or services that no one at the district really knew about. An $800,000 payment, for example, to a company called WordPerfect something, or can't remember it exactly, but essentially once a year, one $800,000 payment to this company, and no one knew what the company had provided. So the movie sort of follows her and follows the superintendent and the CBO as the stories start to come to light. Most conflict of interest problems and situations involve undisclosed interests. I think the members of the board will recognize when I say your Form 700s are due April 1st of every year, your statement of economic interest. There's a reason for that, and I'm sure that you recognize and remember that, and it's important for the public that we serve to know what our financial interests are, so that when there's a decision that's being considered by the board, the public can tell what is the impetus of your action or your conversation on a particular decision. Is it because you might have some interest that's related to the decision? And by the way, if you do have some interest that's related to the decision, of course, the law requires that you recuse yourself from taking a part in that decision. If you are the individual or you own a company with which the district might be contracting, there's a separate law called Government Code Section 1090 that flat out prohibits that contract from being entered into in the first place. Anyway, so most conflict of interest are going to involve some undisclosed financial interests. That's why it's important that you fill out your Form 700s as the other employees who work for you at the highest levels of district must also do. There are problems sometimes with fictitious vendors or contractors, involvement with a particular vendor or contractor having a separate business in competition with an entity, or an employee accepting gifts, either gifts of travel or kickbacks. I'll talk about some of the examples from the movie in a little bit here. There are some common factors that show up in circumstances involving fraud. There are 3 of them here. Typically, always it's going to involve people, right? Whether it's an employee or an official, a vendor, or related parties to those people, and sometimes even volunteers. Those are the ones who typically are going to be at the heart of the problem. It's also common that the person or the people involved are capable of not only committing the fraud, but having the ability to conceal it, meaning they control some of the information flow through the district. They know, who needs to see what when and who shouldn't see something else at any other time. It's also the case that offenders usually understand how the district works, what its internal controls are, and then they have the ability to exploit those weaknesses to plan and carry out the fraud. So going back to Bad Education, the movie, there is a scene where the CBO, the woman, is having a family party, and I think it's Thanksgiving, and she happens to live at a beautiful beach house on Long Island, and you could tell it's very nicely appointed. There are a lot of people there, and people are swimming and having cocktails, and her niece comes up to her. Her niece happens to be a district employee as well, sort of in a clerical position, and the niece says, hey, Christmas is coming up, and Johnny really wants a PlayStation, but we're really tight right now. I look around and I see how well you're doing, you and your husband. Could I impose upon you for a loan so I can buy the PlayStation? I'll pay you back after the holidays. And the CBO sort of looks at her with a half smile, and she takes a credit card out of her purse and slides it over the counter to her niece. And it's a district credit card. The niece looks at it and says, I don't understand. What do you mean? And the CBO says, look, don't worry about it. This is a pretty common thing. It's not a big deal. Go ahead and do what you need to do. Just give me the receipts and I'll take care of it on Monday. Well, that's, that ended up being one of the sins, for lack of a better word, that came to light. But it's a good example of how, these 3 bullet points here on the common factors of fraud can play themselves out, right? It's someone who had the ability to do it and the ability to conceal it. And that's what the CBO did in that scene of the movie. So how do we prevent these things from happening? Each of us has a role, obviously. As board members, it's your responsibility to understand the fiduciary duties that we're talking about, and ultimately to exercise the oversight that you are given the power to do. Ask questions, whether it's of the superintendent or the general counsel. They're there to answer those questions and to give you the information that you need. For your staff, when I spoke to them this morning, I tried to impart upon them the importance of, if you see something, say something. If something doesn't feel quite right, or it seems a little suspicious or a little strange, bring that to your supervisor or call the anonymous hotline. Do something just so that you can satisfy that something bad is not really happening. The real responsibility for fiduciaries at all levels is to understand that it takes active involvement. It takes paying attention. It takes speaking up. It takes asking questions. And the fact of the matter is, we are all public servants. We are paid by public funds. Whether it's the salaries that the superintendent and his employees make, or the stipends that you get, or the reimbursements for for engaging in the activity, going to conferences, things like that. That's all public money that we're spending. And so, we have an extra obligation to be sure that when there might be a hint of something going on, that we raise our hands, we ask somebody, we find out that everything is okay. And if it's not okay, then that the proper steps are followed up to essentially to stop the behavior. And understand here that every organization is vulnerable. They're made up of human beings, and human beings make mistakes, sometimes innocently, sometimes not innocently. But ultimately, we have to recognize that the vulnerability can be reduced by establishing mechanisms, by setting up systems and controls to prevent or detect fraudulent activities. Again, that's a part of what we're doing here today, and I'm glad to see that the district has instituted several systems to work on these issues. Understand also that people who commit fraud generally follow a pattern whereby they start small and then it grows in magnitude. Also another reason why it's important to pay attention. The scene from the movie that I think about here is where the superintendent finally gets called on the carpet for what ends up being more than $2 million worth of a misappropriation of funds. And he's sitting with the board president on the bleachers and essentially is saying, hey, look, I never meant for this to happen. It started, 6 or 8 years ago where I went out to lunch and I pulled out the wrong credit card to pay for that $20 meal. I told myself that I would fix it on Monday, and I didn't fix it on Monday, and no one said anything, and it just sort of built up from there. Now, I have to say that Hugh Jackman's a great actor, and he looked pretty convincing, but Ray Romano, the board president who was talking to him, wasn't buying it because it was clear that Hugh Jackman had really done some serious planning, some serious plotting, some serious deception. And what he was holding over the board in that movie, and some of his colleagues in the administration, his external auditor, he was holding over them sort of the power of his personality. He had brought the district from a place where they were, performing so up till they were the #4 school district in the state. They had great college acceptance data. They had high rankings. They were they had notoriety for innovative services. And he essentially tried to tell the board in that instance, hey, look, the reason that we're doing so well is because of what I'm doing here. And if you want to stop that, well, I guess that's up to you, but it's, the school district's going to suffer. We're going to lose in the rankings. Our property values are going to go down, which for the board president was particularly threatening, because the board president was a real estate agent in that community who was doing very well because the property values had gone up. But the board president, looked at the guy and said, "You're out of your mind. This is completely wrong and illegal, and we're not going to let you cover it up. We're not going to protect you." There started the public investigation, the arrest of the superintendent. I mean, it's a very extreme example. And again, I don't think in any way that any of this is happening in Sweetwater or any district that I work with in California. But it's a very, very stark example of how far things can go when fiduciaries aren't paying attention. There's a great scene where the external auditor, is said, hey, is told, go see what the CBO did. Go take a look at her receipts. And within the space of an hour, he's able to add up about $225,000 worth of expenses that are unaccounted for. And he goes to the superintendent and tells the superintendent goes to the board, and they lose their mind, because, how do you explain that? How do you explain that to your public? There's $250,000 unaccounted for. That was really just the tip of the iceberg. It ended up being, with respect to the CBO, more than $4 million worth of embezzlement. Both she and the superintendent did some serious time in jail. Some examples of fraud that were in the movie and elsewhere, paying shadow vendors for no work product, purchasing supply items for personal use, fake employees on the payroll, unsubstantiated travel expenses, overpaying wages and benefits, collusion among employees. And that was what was happening between Hugh Jackman and the female character in that movie. Irregular journal entries and transfers, and unauthorized or falsified transactions that lead to essentially theft. Some signs that we should be on the lookout for when folks are engaging in this activity. Unexplained or unusual favor with or from a vendor or a contractor. Living beyond their means. I mentioned to you the CBO who had the beach house in bad education. She actually had 2 other beach houses in Florida and a beautiful Mercedes-Benz. Failure to complete or file your Form 700s, whether that's at the board level or down through the organization. Where an employee displays an unusual interest in a vendor or a supplier, where they sort of feel like, or where it becomes evident that anytime you're dealing with this particular contractor or vendor, the employee has to have full control over all the information and documentation. No one else can interact with the vendor besides this person. This person takes an inordinate amount of care and concern and attention over that vendor. Well, we have to ask ourselves the question, why is that? Why is it that employee is so worried about vendor A but doesn't seem to care about the other vendors with which the district is doing business? Could be a sign of fraud. Employees conducting business on the side, that's not unique to the public sector. I think every employer has to remind their employees, when you're at work, you're on work time. Your computer at your desk and your phone are for district use, not for your own personal side business. And then finally, another sign is where the address of a vendor or a contractor is the same as that of an employee. The student reporter in the movie Bad Education ran down that $800,000 bill that I told you about. It was a Park Avenue address in Manhattan, and it turned out to be where the superintendent lived on the weekends with his partner. So how do we uncover fraud? Sometimes we find it in other ways besides the examples that I just went over with you. Sometimes our staff could bring it out where they're having conflicts with another member of the staff, and they want to be highly critical of them, or they want to drop the dime on them. Quite frankly, that's probably, although we all want a harmonious workplace at all times, if there's an actor in the workplace who is breaking the law, certainly we want to know about it, and so we'll take the information from wherever it comes. It's also important for fiduciaries to engage in site visits and interviews. Essentially, again, this is that thing of do something, say something, show your face, let people know that that you are you're in tune, you're in touch, you care about what's happening, and you ask reasonable questions. Again, going back to one of those first slides, right? The duty of a fiduciary is one of reasonable inquiry. Well, it's reasonable to talk to the superintendent and for the superintendent to talk to his employees about these sorts of issues. It's reasonable for a member of your operations staff to visit a construction site, just to make sure that things are going according to plan. I'm not talking here about micromanaging. I'm not talking about an undue amount of attention, just reasonable inquiry. It's an important part of being a fiduciary. And again, at the district, you have an anonymous hotline by phone and by internet through which somebody who wants to be a whistleblower or anybody who just even wants to raise a question can do that in a safe and an anonymous environment. The types of controls that are important in maintaining our fiduciary obligations are typically going to be internal controls, where there's a separation of duties and also a rotation of duties. So you don't have these silos where just one employee has been doing the same paperwork for the past 15, 20, or 30 years without any real oversight from anybody. So it's good to rotate duties and to keep duties separate so that people are forced to collaborate with one another in achieving the goals and the work of the district. We want to make sure that we limit access to assets of the district, whether those are facilities or equipment or bank accounts. There have to be internal controls as to who has access, why they have access, who are the people that are checking that they have access and that they've used it appropriately. Again, all of these are best practices that I'm sure that are in place at the district. It's important for managers to take responsibility for their duty to review and/or approve transactions as they come up. I had a conversation with a group of your managers today, and we talked about the importance of that. And finally, engaging in the kind of training that we're doing now and other things on your own that are just going to sort of help you understand the tools that are available, the reasons why we have those tools, and where there are risks within any organization. At the end, I'm going to just be a lawyer and rely on some more Latin. Semper pro populus. The core message of our public service is semper, always for the public, and never for ourselves, never for our friends, never, for just politics, but for the betterment of the students. Mr. President, this is where I'll take questions if you have them.
Thank you, sir. That was a very informative presentation. A lot of information, a lot of good information. I'll throw it out there to the board for anybody who has any comments or questions on this presentation. I will just add that I think in the internal controls, the rotation of duties. So could you kind of go a little bit more into that? Are you saying that, would that be in regards to our, like our accounting, or that would cover a whole, the whole district as a whole, or how could we make sure we're probably doing that? And I'll ask the superintendent, I think he could explain what we might be doing or how that works.
Sure. Maybe I'll let Dr. Aguirre start, but I'm happy to supplement or amplify.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Duran and President Segura. So in essence, that is where the essence of checks and balances comes in. And as we're thinking about how we kind of work our procedures, it's one of the key components that Dr. Salkeld has been working on as she works to implement a new system, the Infor system, to ensure that there's an alignment and a visibility, because I think this is about visibility between and amongst the departments of human resources and fiscal. One of the initial stages in that progress is to develop, implement, and bring on board a position control staff member that is what they are currently doing is a check and a balance with the two different departments. So as we think about that kind of the rotation of duties and being able to have the visibility so that multiple departments can have that feedback and that ability to have the visibility in terms of finance to positions, but also just in kind of how are the numbers looking. So Dr. Salkeld, I don't know if you want to add a little bit to that in terms of rotation of duties, coupled with kind of the broader theme of really checks and balances.
Thank you, Dr. Aguirre and President Segura. Yes, to your question, and specifically with staff, there is that check and balance process that we're working internally within the division. The position or the budget position control analyst has been key, but when you take a group of, let's say, accountants or the budget analyst, the director and I are working very closely to ensure that there is a rotation amongst schools that they're responsible for, that there's a rotation amongst programs that they're responsible for, because first and foremost, it provides that cross-training ability, just in the event someone is out and so forth, but it also gives that second perspective when there's a different view on the work that's being done, and it creates that segregation of duties. And then two, most importantly, as we've taken things from outside the division to the department or to the school sites, we were sharing earlier with the management team how key that the meetings have been that we've put in place over the last 2 years with them, of giving visibility to the financials, having them understand the ins and outs of the budget process, looking at the positions, understanding the workflows that we've been putting in place to really provide that information from the financial standpoint and how that trickles into the financial statements as a whole.
And if I may, Dr. Salkeld, to add a little bit to that. So it's not only in terms the district office, but that visibility also exists with school sites. So school sites have the ability to see their budgets and question. Departments have the ability to see the budgets and question. So it's building in that process to ensure there's the ability to seek clarification and for multiple eyes to be on a particular set of numbers.
Thank you very much. That's very good information. I see Paula Hall, Trustee Hall has a question.
Yes, thank you, President Segura. And I thank you, Mr. for the presentation. It was very good. I agree with everything that we do really need to have. Accountability is what another word for making sure that we are doing our due diligence to make sure that we have the information. And if we don't get the information, to keep pushing. I think that's one of the messages that I'm hearing.
Yep.
I was curious. I had a question first. I also echo the question that Mr. Segura brought forward. Would that also be a rotation of who picks? I would think that one of the things that I was questioning earlier when we had a board item on who picks up certain warrants from this county office of ed to bring them back for disbursement out throughout the district, why there were so many people on the list. I think one of the things is that the more people you have on the list, the more you can rotate. That might be good, but at the same time, it doesn't narrow the responsibility, I think, enough to make certain accountability for certain people, or just to make sure that you're really controlling some of that activity. So I don't know how you feel about that. This is just like going and picking up the payroll warrants and bringing them back to the central office so that they can hand them out or send them out to the sites for disbursement, those sorts of things, or even B warrants for the commercial warrants. What are your feelings about that?
Thank you, Trustee Hall. Mr. President, if I may. So I'm grateful for the way that you framed the question, Trustee Hall, because it illustrates an important point about all of this, and that is when it comes to operationally ensuring that we are complying with our duties, we're ensuring accountability. You have to take somebody, whether it's the superintendent or the CBO or somebody under their direction, to take a very meaningful, realistic look at what particular situation we're dealing with. So in the case of picking up warrants at the different sites, okay, let's examine and let's determine, is there a particular risk that's involved with, a certain number of people doing that or not doing it? And that's going to be a different answer than a different, another area in the finance department that might require less rotation or more rotation, as the case may be. I mean, these issues really do have to be looked at, if not forensically, at least very technically. And I'm confident that Dr. Geary and his staff, they recognize the various points at which you take different degrees of oversight, and whether it's rotation or reviews and checks, and they tailor that to the appropriate circumstance in each department for each major thing where there's money being moved. And certainly if they don't, they know who to call, right? They know that there are professionals in the industry that have expertise and training to make sure that they can assist you and your staff in setting up those internal controls and protocols. Dr. Geary, if I've missed anything, please let me know.
Thank you, Mr. Duran. Actually, we're right in the middle of implementing a new platform that really kind of builds that overlap between finance and human resources. So it's an opportunity to really kind of look at this really deeply and be able to develop these procedures to ensure that there's those checks and balances, multiple sets of eyes when we're doing processes regarding to finance or any other related action item.
Thank you. My other question was about the trend on slide 21, I believe, where you were speaking about the Public Records Act, and that not all records are public, like HR, human resources records, or actions, discussions that the board may be having around human resources or personnel things. Has there been changes in the last year or so, maybe the last year and a half, around how much employee records are released to the public?
Not that I'm aware of in terms of an actual amendment to the Public Records Act.
Okay.
Each of the, if I may just elaborate a little bit, when it comes to the Public Records Act and figuring out whether an exemption applies, it's a very fact-specific inquiry almost every time. There are certain records that are going to always be public, even though they're employee records, right? For example, high-level officials, their employment contracts, always public. But there are other records that may be on the line for different levels of employees. They may or may not fall into an exemption. So General Counsel Carbuccia may know otherwise, but I'm unaware of a change in the Public Records Act specifically for employee records.
All right, thank you.
I think beyond the information that Mr. Duran has shared, Ms. Hall, the most recent changes really related to the City of San Jose case, which spoke to the ability to access personal cell phone information and personal email for employees who were doing business on those personal devices. That is a big change. There are some other changes that aren't so new that we've talked about previously about disciplinary actions that Mr. Duran was talking about. But really, those are the biggest changes that have come out. At least in our arena, there's a lot that's been out related to police records and police recordings, but not around our employees.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tarantino.
Thank you, Mr. Segura. I have a question regarding the use of experts, the hiring of experts to guide us in our decision making in the fiduciary responsibility. I'll use an example. We have experts that advise us on mellow roofs. And so in terms of what they're presenting, if they're presenting a line that says this is the best practice, this is what is required, by the tax rolls and all this other stuff, at what point does the fiduciary responsibility that we have collide with their expertise? First question. Second question, is it a good practice to rotate the kinds of experts that we have, and if so, at what point would be the rotation? Like, was it every 3 years? Is it every 10 years? Is it every 5 years from your personal experience?
Sure. Dr. Segura, Mr. Segura, if I may, I will respond to the first one first. So the use of experts is an important piece of the puzzle, as you recognize, Trustee Tarantino. The reason that they're experts and the reason why you hire them is that they have a level of education and or experience and knowledge that we don't have internally, or that needs to supplement what we have internally. And so as a fiduciary in your position, or in my position, if I were an employee there at the district, I have to still comply with that reasonable inquiry, right? It is what this person telling me reasonable based on the facts that I know. And I'm not sure if it's a part of your question, but certainly it makes me wonder, okay, how reasonable is it for me to rely on this person and what they've said? I mean, do I have some sort of duty to go and investigate deeper than what would just be a reasonable inquiry? And generally the answer is no. Is it reasonable for you to rely on the expertise of somebody who puts themselves out as an expert? Is it reasonable for you to assume that they are being forthright and honest with you. Yes, again, you should make reasonable inquiries, right? Is this person somebody who has, a fine reputation in the industry? Are they properly licensed? Have they ever been, subject of a malpractice claim, or have they been overly involved in litigation? Those are the sorts of reasonable inquiries that you as a board member and your executive staff and leadership can and should be asking. But ultimately, is it, the question is it reasonable for you to rely on those people and the things that they're telling you? That's why you hire them. So the answer is yes. If they've made a mistake or if they have intentionally deceived you, that's why I write into every contract for a professional consultant that they will indemnify and protect and defend the district for harm that results from their work or from their lack of work, as the case may be. The second question, I'm sorry, I lost it in my long-winded answer. I apologize.
No, I really appreciated that answer. So if we are looking at, rotating responsibilities and stuff like that, at what point is it prudent to rotate an expert that we have on the payroll? Is it every 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, keep them forever, or whatever? What do you think? Professional.
Yeah, I'm unaware of a hard and fast rule, a rule of thumb when it comes to auditors, for example, that I use with my clients is, about every 4 or 5 years, you should, should test the marketplace, put out an RFP or make other reasonable inquiries, just to be sure that the people that you've been working with are still at the top of their game, that they're still giving you a good value for the money. But it's not a hard and fast rule. I know some agencies who have stuck with one auditor for 7, 8, 9 years. It really depends on the complexity of their financial situation, the environment in which they're working, the climate, those sorts of things. There's no specific legal requirement to change every so number of years, to my knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? So I have one more. Under your slide, I don't know what number was. I think it was the signs of fraud. You had written in there, you had a bullet, or you wrote something about to show your face, site visits and interviews. So, I know the only sites I've ever visited, I don't know if that was, you were just speaking of board members. But the only sites I've ever visited is the schools themselves, or with a meeting with the superintendent. I've never gone into departments, and maybe I don't know if I'm supposed to, but I just kind of want to clear that up. And I'm not an expert in what they do, but if you could just add some more to that.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm glad that you brought that up, because as I was going through that slide, I tried to focus on the superintendent and his staff doing those things, because you're correct. For most elected bodies in California, there's a certain level of what's the word here? The interaction that elected officials are supposed to have with employees, correct? The common example for cities, at least, is that city council members aren't allowed to really interact with employees of the city except for purposes of inquiry. But everything else must be done through the city manager, right? And that's because, as we all know, the employees work for the superintendent. They work for the city manager for the most part, right? And so there's that separation of duties, right? The sort of the proper and common place for board members to have. And so the duty for a site visit and the duty for an interview, I would say that you are correct. It doesn't necessarily fall directly on board members, except for those people for whom you have control and authority, right? In other words, swing by the superintendent's office and ask him a question. Swing by Ms. Carbuccia's office and check in with her. Those are the sorts of levels of inquiry that I think are appropriate to board members. And if you have concerns or issues that fall lower down in the organization, to work through the appropriate channels to get those addressed.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for clearing that up. I wanted to make sure that was clear.
Thank you for catching that. I appreciate that. That was part of the other slides.
Anything else from anybody? Ms. Hall, Trustee Hall.
Yes, thank you, President Segura. And Mr. Duran, I wanted to also point out that we have an internal audit team that really, it's our expectation that they would bring forward concerns to the superintendent, but also to the board via the audit subcommittee. So there are times, is it inappropriate for a board member to speak to a internal auditor without, going through the superintendent?
It certainly is cleaner and more appropriate to go through an appropriate channel, whether it's a superintendent or at the audit committee itself. I'm going to let Dr. Aguirre take the heat on this one because, all due respect and quite frankly, I'm not privy to your contract with your auditors, and so I don't know what the contract might provide for by way or your internal policies.
This is not an external auditor, so it's not a contract. These are employees of the district. However, I believe that because of their fiduciary duties and oversight, if they were performing internal audit and found issues that they wanted to bring immediately to our attention, that they would have that access.
Absolutely.
Without having to go, wait upon something else. And that there's times that I'm personally the chair of the audit subcommittee. I just want to make sure it's okay for me to check in with the audit team, the audit subcommittee team, without going through a formal process. If there's something I'm aware that they're doing, like per their audit plan, just kind of checking in. How are you guys doing on that? How's it going? I don't know if that's wrong or if that's, I don't think that I just want to make sure.
No, I appreciate the question, and I can see Dr. Aguirre does want to answer too, so I will let him and then I will jump in.
Thank you, Mr. John. Yeah, so generally speaking, on a reasonable basis, I think my suggestion would be to work through the superintendent. However, in the case there's an extraordinary concern, then that I think that's kind of what we're really having a conversation about. It's not necessarily the general rule of thumb, but in case there's an extraordinary issue, I think that the Audit Finance Subcommittee could potentially be one vehicle. I was about to introduce a separate vehicle because we have another presentation, and this is a great segue into the next presentation about the fraud hotline. That is something else that we also have as a vehicle for reporting concerns. Mr. Duran, I didn't know if before I steal your thunder, are we ready to transition to the next item?
No, I'll let Dr. Moore go, but I do want Trustee Hall to know that, and what I heard Dr. Aguirre say was this concept of reasonable inquiry. Is it reasonable for you to check in with folks, Trustee Hall, in your role as a member of the audit subcommittee? I believe the answer is yes. But it should, to the extent that you can, it should involve, other people who can assist you in getting the information that you need.
Right. Well, I'm not quite, really, that was kind of is there this scenario? But honestly, I think what I say to people that work for this district when I'm at a school site visiting, or if I'm at a central office and I run into somebody, is that I'm there, I work for the district, or I'm, representing the district. I was elected to be involved in what I do and to be informed about what I do. So when you say it really should all go through the superintendent, I think as an elected official, I always was trying to encourage that people can feel free to reach out to me anytime that they so desire, whether they're an employee or not, because I need to be connected so that my decision making is informed. So I understand we always try to keep our superintendent, that's all we do is forward emails, talk to him about things that have come up, making sure that he is on board and informed as we move along. But I just wanted to make sure that there are times when we may communicate directly with an employee of the district, and it's not nefarious in any way, shape, or form, and it's not intended to undermine the authority that they must work under as an employee of the district. However, we should be always, I want employees to always feel they have access to us no matter what, because they are who we work to, really make decisions for on their behalf, on the behalf of our students and the families in our community. So that's all. I appreciate
I
it.
appreciate that, and I certainly agree with you. And really, and I'll shut up after this, Mr. President. We'll give it to Dr. Moore. But if you think about what I started talking about with the roles of with the fiduciary duty and the role of fiduciary, it is many of the things that you just described, Trustee Hall. And so it's a fine balance, and ultimately, as you said, we're you and your colleagues on the board and your staff, we're all working for the benefit of the students and the staff at the district there. So I think I'm right okay with you there.
Right. So
Thank you very
if I
much.
may, President Segura and members of the board, Mr. Duran, I'd like to transition to Dr. Moore, who will briefly discuss the fraud hotline. But before we do that, I did want to, it's a good time to kind of intercede and state that this training is part of our commitment that we made to the County Office of Education under the AB 139 extraordinary audit. So we indicated part of our response would be to conduct trainings for high-level employees, Board of Trustees, employees who work in finance or other departments such as that we would in essence bring these types of trainings forward to raise our awareness, to raise our understanding of what our calling is. So I think that is very important. This was part of our fraud prevention training, i.e. the fiduciary responsibilities. And then as a separate item that we committed to was having a conversation and training around what is the fraud prevention hotline, and then providing information about how it actually works and the process. So that is part of why we've asked Dr. Moore to also present around the hotline. So I just thought it was important to point that out as part of our ongoing efforts to address that. Dr. Moore?
Thank you, Dr. Geary, and well, good evening, board. I appreciate the time. I have a very brief presentation that really speaks to what Mr. Duran and Dr. Geary have been speaking about in terms of avenues and vehicles that we have to report, specifically fraud. Ideally, and Ms. Hall, Trustee Hall, I believe you touched on this, ideally, we would love to have an environment wherein folks felt very confident and secure in reporting things to their supervisors, to the board, to the superintendent and such. And I think we're always striving to create that kind of environment. But our fraud hotline is really a vehicle that's been in place since 2018, and it's an opportunity for not just our internal staff and folks that work in the district, but folks externally to let us know about things and let us know about things in a very secure, confidential, and anonymous way regarding fraud. And so I'll begin the presentation, and also that implementing an anonymous hotline was one of the recommendations from the Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistance Team, that we have a hotline available for internal reporting as well as reporting from external and third parties. The basic information for our fraud hotline is that it's specifically designed to report cases of fraud, and that's an important distinction, because the fraud hotline, as you'll see in this next bullet, allows us to receive reports that are 100% anonymous. And when we receive complaints, and you're one of the primary folks that deals with complaints as they come in from district staff and from externally, typically we need to, there will be some kind of inquiry or investigation connected to the complaint. When we get a fraud complaint, if it's anonymous, we're still able, based on the information provided, to conduct an investigation that's substantial, where we're able to glean some things and make some findings. When we're dealing with other kinds of complaints, like a discrimination complaint, if you will, when we don't have specific information about the complainant, or when there's just not enough information to conduct that investigation, it makes it really difficult to make determinations and to make a finding. But with fraud specifically, and that's what this process is set up for, we can collect anonymous information. The reporting party can remain anonymous, and we can still move forward with a viable investigation. The district, when requested through our system that we use, will maintain the confidentiality of the complainant and the associated documents. Of course, that comes with a caveat, because complaints that are submitted to the complaint hotline can be made public via public records request, but the hotline itself is set up in such a way that the reporting party remains anonymous to us. There's a mechanism through the third party Whistleblower Incorporated that allows us to communicate, but we unless the reporting party allows themselves to be identified, we never get to know the identity, and that's part of the contract of this service. And of course, our district will not retaliate against those who have reported suspected fraud or participate in an investigation. And really, that's part of our larger board policy of 4119.1, part of our civil and legal rights, that spells out that whistleblower protections for folks who report things like fraud, as well as participate in investigations. So the fraud hotline is specifically designed to be used by district employees, as well as external parties, to report even folks who are connected to the district, vendors and others doing business, any activities such as fraud, waste, and abuse, all of the things Mr. Duran so eloquently pointed out, those are applicable and would be something that this hotline is designed for reporting and for us to act upon. How to contact the fraud line is very simple. There's two ways. It's a toll-free number, the 866-921-6714, and that's a Sweetwater specific number. And then there's a link on our district website, and I'll show you exactly where that link is. That links directly to the Integrity Counts service from Whistleblower Incorporated. The service itself is available 24 hours, 7 days a week, and the folks who work there, they have translation services available. So regardless of the language spoken of the reporting party, the service is able to provide translation. So as I mentioned, it's on our district website. On the very main page, if you were to scroll down the main page, you would see that there's the fraud hotline on our main district page, and then there's, in the red, is the hyperlink to the fraud hotline. If you were to click on that, our district fraud hotline information page would come up with that very same number, that toll-free number, and then another link to start an online reporting. And the online reporting is a very user-friendly website. This is the front page of that online reporting website. It gives a choice of how to file a report. It also gives the reporting party access to continue to review their report after they've submitted that report. And then, of course, there's still the toll-free phone number to call the hotline. And if you see up here in the top right-hand corner here, there's a pull down for English and numerous other languages, including Spanish, Tagalog, and other languages that the online system automatically translates to, so that it's accessible in multiple languages. So obviously we like to inform, when I've done these presentations for our parent groups and provided presentations to administrators, what we want to know is the folks who are involved, names if they have them, position titles, of course, what's the alleged incident, how the incident was committed, what exactly was going on, where the incident was committed, which site or department, and then an approximate timeline for the incident, all important information to know, and as much information that can be provided during this process, it helps us as the district to respond appropriately when this information is provided to the fullest extent. And then what happens when a report is made? The whistleblower website immediately sends a report to the reviewers, and the specific reviewers are the internal auditors, as we've mentioned, Ms. Enriquez and Mr. Moreno, as well as myself as the Chief Compliance Officer. So as soon as someone clicks submit or hangs up the phone if they were to make a call, we get an email detailing that report. And again, it's immediate. It happens all times of night. It sends it to our email. Instantly, the internal auditors and myself generally contact each other and let each other know what kind of report we've got. And just as a general rule, things that Mr. Duran covered in terms of fiduciary duties and financial fraud and financial pieces very typically go to the internal auditors, and they review those and initiate an investigation as needed. Sometimes our fraud hotline is used to question a policy or a procedure or something that we would deem as non-fraud related. And very typically those non-fraud related items will come to the compliance office. We will work with cited admin or district department admin to effect an investigation as necessary. Of course, if these complaints can be substantiated, the next steps are typically taken through the district senior management as well as the superintendent. And if we were to uncover criminal issues, those issues could be referred to law enforcement via this process. We have an administrative regulation. That administrative regulation was approved by this board back in 2017. Regarding the fraud hotline and fraud prevention, and our Integrity Counts fraud hotline portal has been up since January 2018. Shortly after we approved the policy, we got the contract with the Whistleblower Incorporated, and so again, it's a very user-friendly service that we have. And we have had reports, and we have conducted investigations based on those reports. I think if I could ask Dr. Salkeld or Ms. Enriquez to just speak about how we ensure that the reports that come into the fraud hotline are not only acted upon, but also reported back to the board via the audit subcommittee.
So Dr. Moore, I can certainly answer that question. So with the coordinated effort, as you mentioned, between yourself and the internal audit team, we do on a quarterly basis share the report with our audit and finance subcommittee. So that they have access to, inquire in any specific questions that's noted on there. Also provides, any public feedback, any opportunity there. And the report is also shared with our board.
And so, again, while this service has been in play for a couple of years now, it's always important and good to have a refresher, particularly now, as we are conducting this a fraud and fiduciary responsibility board workshop, and also for our public to know that we have this service. It is available to them, and we would encourage folks that as they see things to report them. And if they are not comfortable reporting them directly to supervisor or to the district, that's what this fraud hotline has specifically been set up for, is to allow folks to do so anonymously. Are there any questions? I see Ms. Hall, Trustee Hall.
Yes.
Thank you, President Segura. Yes, my question is this. I understand it is anonymous. I've had a couple of questions when we first established the hotline. There was some concern around the call, or if they emailed, they would be traced back to their email, that it could be traced. And I understand that you could be using a district device to do that, your desktop computer at the district, and you were going to write this email because you didn't have a computer at home yourself. You didn't own one. And there is some kind of tracking mechanism on district activity with use of district equipment, isn't there? And so how do you ensure that this can't be, followed through, or somebody couldn't pull that data and trace it through and figure out who would? What kind of assurance do you have on that?
So, and I'm not the director of IT, but I can tell you that my experience in using the fraud hotline is that once we get a notification, we log into the service, and it does not, it provides us a number, and that's how the case is identified. And unless the reporting party has provided us a name, the only way we can communicate back to that reporting party, it's not through email or through another mechanism. The only way we can report back is to use the messaging feature that's part of the Integrity Counts Whistleblower Incorporated service. And so we never directly communicate with the complainant via this mechanism. It's always through the third party. And so I guess your question may be asking, could district devices be tracked to see if they're accessing the third-party vendor? But I think even then, I'm not sure that it could get past the Integrity Counts firewalls that they would have for security. But that would probably be an IT question that I wouldn't have an answer to.
No, thank you. I think that's what I wanted to make sure that we were really communicating. There is a pretty strong wall around anybody being able to identify somebody that utilized the hotline or emailed the fraud hotline, simply because nobody knows until that vendor sends it back to you, and then and everything is really walled off. So I appreciate that. I think that's the message I wanted to get out.
Yes, and that's a very important message. I mean, the whole purpose of the service is to ensure that there's anonymity when folks are making that kind of report.
Any further questions or comments from the board? If not, we could wrap this up. First, I would like to thank Mr. Duran and Dr. Moore for your presentations on fiduciary responsibility and the fraud component of it. And thank you, Dr. Garrity, for explaining why we're having this meeting. I meant to throw that to you at the beginning. It was written down. like Deanne had written it down for me, and I went right over it. But I appreciate everybody's input, and I think this is definitely a very needed and a very informative presentation, and it served a lot of use. So unless somebody else has any questions or comments, I'm going to say we're adjourned. Okay, we're adjourned. The special board workshop is now adjourned. Thank you. Good night.